I don't know how long it lasts. I believe the testosterone blockers, first of all, I didn't know that they would remove my pain. I thought they would just give me more time. But it might be 2 or 3 years, could be 6 months. But at some point, the testosterone blockers stop working. So that's well understood. And at that point, there's either another cure, if I can find one, which would be a miracle, or we get back to where I was earlier this year, which is, maybe I have to pick a time to check out. But the fact that I got this new set of drugs that work right before I was making my plans, I should have been deceased 2 weeks ago.
All right, now we are about to have a very interesting conversation. Scott Adams is the creator of Dilbert. He's also been charged with racism. We're going to talk about that a little bit. He's does a show called Real Coffee with Scott Adams. He's on the right in so many issues, on the right wing, and he's dying. So lots to tackle there. But what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to have an open and honest conversation. And we're going to try to find out about one another and try to learn, okay? So let's do that to the best of our abilities. Scott, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. It sounds like we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we do indeed. Okay, first, Scott, I want to talk to you about your past, your roots, and really get to know you and learn how you got to be in the position that you are. And I enjoyed Dilbert growing up, and I want to ask you about that as well, et cetera. But first, you have the same kind of prostate cancer that Biden has. So you put out a statement recently saying you might not have much time left. In fact, you were thinking of euthanizing yourself by the end of June. Thank God we're in July and you're still here. But give us a sense of what your condition is, what the status on it is, et cetera.
Well, so there are two types of prostate cancer. If it's localized, which is not what I have, it's completely curable. So sometimes people confuse it. But if it's metastasized, as it is in my case, and I think Biden as well, then it's incurable. 6 months ago, I got the terminal designation from my doctor, meaning that in California, you can choose, as long as you're terminal, and you've got 2 doctors that have signed off on it, you can choose the day that you die, and they'll send you some poison that puts you to sleep, and you just sort of never wake up. And I had gone through the paperwork, put that all together just in case. And the last several months, I'd say the first 5 months of this year, were absolute painful hell. Just my whole body it felt like hot pokers were being shoved through my back and my legs and my arm every day. So I decided that I was done with it. And I just had to get through my stepdaughter's wedding. That was in reception. It was at the beginning of the month. And I thought to myself, all right, the end of June, I'm out of here, because I just couldn't live with that much pain, and the painkillers weren't doing much to help. But I was still experimenting with some other medications with another doctor who had some new thing that was coming out. And in preparation for that, before actually taking the new meds, I was put on a testosterone blocker, well, 2 of them actually. And they removed my pain completely. I was in a wheelchair. I was using a walker to go from one room to the other, and I was just done. And it just removed all my symptoms. So I've got a little bit of leg stiffness, but basically I can get around anytime I want. And I don't know how long it lasts. I believe the testosterone blockers. First of all, I didn't know that they would remove my pain. I thought they would just give me more time. But it might be 2 or 3 years, could be 6 months. But at some point, the testosterone blockers stop working. So that's well understood. And at that point, there's either another cure, if I can find one, which would be a miracle, or we get back to where I was earlier this year, which is, maybe I have to pick a time to check out. But the fact that I got this new set of drugs that work um, right before I was making my plans, I should have been deceased 2 weeks ago. That was my plan. But now I'm all good. I I had a perfectly wonderful day today. Worked. I could work out. I could probably go swimming later if I feel like it. So things are looking good at the moment.
Wow. So, does the hormone treatment just deal with the pain, or does it help to cure the disease, or at least have it in retreat?
Well, there's no cure. So what it's intended to do is slow it down because the cancer needs the testosterone to feed upon. So you take away his food. Here I am. This is the non-doctor version of it. I didn't know it was even supposed to deal with the pain. Nobody mentioned that. It was a completely unexpected result. So I got off all my painkillers, which also destroy your brain. I was trying to still do my work, but my brain was at about 10%. But now I'm just on that. Now, what it really does, what it feels like, is that I was in a video game, which is my life, and that my character died. So that was a character that had a full set of testosterone because it does change your personality. So when you remove the testosterone, you're almost like another player character. You're born in the same game. I have all the same assets and I have the same job, but I'm kind of a different person. It would be hard to say that I'm the same person I was 2 months ago.
Super interesting. I mean, I have to say, like, does that make you empathize at all with people who transition their gender?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. I'll tell you what it feels like. Before it happens, before I did the testosterone blockers, I had this option. Months ago, I could have done it. I just didn't know it'd be this effective. But the reason I resisted is that to me, that was dying. So in other words, if you take me and you remove my testosterone, I'm not me anymore. Like I'm basically dead. And of course, nobody wants to be dead, and nobody wants to remove their sex drive. Because it's just so basic to everything you think about and plan and do. But what happens is the moment it's gone, you don't miss it. Nobody tells you that part either. So as soon as you hit it, you don't have interest in the whole mating, part of life, you don't really miss it. So I wake up and I think, oh, what do I have to do today? Work is fun. My conversation with you, I was looking forward to. So you just find other interests. Food tastes better. Sitting in the sun outdoors feels really good. So there's still plenty of pleasure, but you wouldn't know it until you're actually in that situation.
Interesting. So, I mean, does that make you empathize with people when they say, "Oh no, yeah, doing hormone blockers can make a big change in your life, and it is not the end of the world. Leads you to a different life where you could be perfectly happy."
Well, I would agree with the big picture thing, which is if you change your hormonal condition, you're really a different person. I was wondering what it would do to my aggressiveness because historically I have a little problem with that.
Well, we're going to get to that.
I can be a little more aggressive than is good for me or the world, and I'm way more mellow now. So I have the same, intellect, the same assets, the same life, but I just don't feel like I need to beat somebody up every 5 minutes.
That's interesting. Do you think it changed your politics at all, or no?
Not yet, because there's also an aspect where you've built in all these habits. So there are a lot of habits I have, which, for example, I would naturally push back if somebody tried to push me, but it wouldn't be coming from my chemistry. It'd be coming from my habits. Just who am I? I'm a person who pushes back. So sometimes the habits are so ingrained that they can cover up, maybe some basic change to who you are hormonally.
Yeah. One more thing about whether it's changed. I'm going to come back to that topic at the end because I want to talk about from a philosophical perspective, more than a political perspective. But for now, on the politics of it, well, there's actually a couple of things. Biden one has the same thing you have, right? So, and people were wondering, hey, did he really just find out, or has he known for a long time? What's your take on that?
Oh, I assume that he must have known because your PSA spikes like way before you get symptoms. And PSA tests would be, I think, routine especially if you're president or ex-president. But I'm not a doctor, so let me not speak too authoritatively here. It might be that when you reach his age, they don't bother testing because the odds of him, dying for a slow-growing prostate cancer are probably actually pretty low compared to all the other things that can get you when you're that age. So it might be, and you'd have to fact check me on this, it might be that the doctors just don't routinely check when you reach that age. So I don't know about that.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, and that's fair. And so when you, do you know if you're taking the same medicine that Biden is taking? Because I read that the most common, medicine to take for this, and sorry that I don't know all the names, it creates like a little bit of brain fog, and some people thought that might be a potential explanation for why Biden was speaking the way that he was. Any thoughts on that, or any experience with that?
Well, the only brain fog I've experienced was from the painkillers. So if he has pain and some painkillers, then yeah, there's definitely some brain fog there. The testosterone blockers that I'm using, they don't seem to have any kind of mental cognitive impact whatsoever. So,
Okay.
so I'm kind of back to normal on that.
All right, interesting. So look, you're an interesting cat because you've done some things that I guess for a lot of people don't match. Like they figure creative type, does the Dilbert graphic, but very right wing. So what happened is part of my questions. And so bring me back all the way to the beginning. Where are you born? What's your family like? How'd you grow up?
I was born and grew up in upstate New York in the mountains, Catskill Mountains. It was a very Republican town and a very small town. So my graduating class was, I don't know, 40 people or something like that. And I didn't have any, political knowledge. I just was surrounded by people who seemed to be more take care of yourself. I don't want to give my money to somebody else. Let them take care of themselves. So I think I came by the philosophy organically, just because I was born into that atmosphere. But in my youth, I kind of rejected a little bit of the things I saw and said, I'm more of a liberal Democrat kind of guy. And the first time I voted was for Jimmy Carter. When I was old enough to vote, that was my first contest. And when I saw how that worked out, and this sounds like a joke, but I don't mean it as a joke, and I'm dead serious. Once I realized that I'd voted for Jimmy Carter and then I saw how it worked out, I said to myself, I should never vote again. I'm not good at this. I don't understand enough about the world. I've just made a terrible mistake. But then, Reagan comes along and he's just so likable. Even if you ignored his politics and you just said, I like this guy. He's fun to watch. So maybe he might have been the one who opened me to the possibility that, I didn't have to be wed to one side or the other. And in 2015, when Trump came down the escalator and got into the contest, and I started paying attention to him a little bit, I realized, because I have a background in hypnosis, I'm a trained hypnotist. I learned that in my 20s. And I watched him and I thought, oh my God, people don't know what's coming. This is the most persuasive most skilled communicator I might have ever seen, like ever. And that would include Reagan and some other greats. And since he wasn't fully expressing all of that, it took a while for him to find his form that he's in now. I knew that people couldn't see it, because if you didn't have a background in persuasion and that sort of field, it would be a little bit hidden by the fact that he doesn't seem like a serious character, or he didn't at the time. And people were calling him a clown. So I was doing a lot of blogging back then. So I wrote a blog post that became super viral called Clown Genius. And the gist of it was that he was a genius at persuasion and getting attention, and that people didn't see this coming, and that he would be the next president. Now, that was at a time when he was, I don't know, polling maybe 13% or something at that time. And people they understood my argument and they were interested in it. That's why the post became viral. But I don't think most people believed it. And then when it got to the Rosie O'Donnell comment in the debates, which we all remember, I actually, when he took the hardest question that a candidate could ever get, and he didn't just get away with it, he made it work for his side. I actually got off the couch and walked toward the television, and I was tingling all over. And I thought, okay, we've never seen this. Whatever this is, it's the first time the country is seeing it, and they still don't know what's coming. And so I would warn people that he would not only change politics, which obviously he has, but I said out loud a number of times that he would change how we see reality itself. And sure enough, reality itself, do we trust the news, or is the news all fake? Are facts all that matters? Or the Ben Shapiro thing? Or is it that how you feel is all that matters, and the persuasion element to that? So that's what I saw coming. And I also got a little bit addicted to some of his policies because they were compatible with things I liked. And I also didn't believe, at least certainly when he ran the first time, that he would be serious about the more, let's say, more aggressive right-wing stuff. So I thought to myself, you know what? I don't want to see the hardworking people around me deported, but I don't think he's going to do it anyway. I think he'll just close the border and make it a little bit more controlled, and I wanted that. So he seemed a lot less, let's say, a lot less right wing at the time, and more of a common sense kind of a guy who was interesting to follow. So I did get pulled into a number of his policies, but I'm a registered Democrat, and I reserve the right to disagree with Trump on as much as I want to, and it does happen.
Yeah. So I want to ask about whether you've been disappointed in some of his policies, but we got to save that because you said about 100 interesting things there. So for that first blog, The Clown Genius, was that the first time people started finding out about your political positions?
Probably, because I wasn't really super politically oriented. I think I'd been blogging a little bit about politics, but it was just one topic among others. So yeah, that probably was the first time I got noticed for that.
Okay.
And when I was kind of with Ann Coulter at the time. I mean, not with her, but I was among the first people who said, "You don't know what's coming. That this guy's going to be president."
So I said that Trump would win the Republican primary in October of 2015, right? And then I said right after the DNC that he'd win the general election. So I saw maybe some of the same things you saw, even though I disagreed with him. But I'm curious how you saw it. So you said it's the first time the country had ever seen anything like this. What do you mean by that?
I mean his communication style and how non-standard it was, how he sucked all the energy out of the room and made everybody else irrelevant. and how when he would answer a question, it was never what you expected. It was just some damn fascinating thing that you knew was going to be the talk of the news for whoever, who knows how long. And that was just all new. I mean, and even now, there's nobody who could really reproduce that. I think he's a once in 100-year, 200-year kind of situation.
Yeah, so I agree with you until the last sentence. The moment that I thought, oh, this cat's different, and different in a way that is going to lead to at least a victory in the primary, was in that October debate when he said, I gave money to all these guys and they did whatever I wanted, to the 16 other Republicans on the stage. And I was like, that's it, he's winning, right? Yeah. And so for me, that was A, breaking cardinal rules you're not supposed to break. So we agree on that, right? B, it was also, he understood that the country was sick of corruption. Whether he actually intended to do something about it or not is a different question, right? But he was calling out the corruption that everybody knew, but mainstream media would absolutely refuse to acknowledge, right? And to this day, mainstream media refuses to acknowledge it. So to me, that was a huge difference maker for him. But you're saying things that go beyond that, right? And the part I disagreed with, by the way, it's not that important, as you said. Well, maybe it is important, but you said we won't see anything like that for another 100 or 200 years. No, I think we'll see it in the next election cycle. I think it's that mainstream media's, you want to talk about hypnosis, and I want to talk about hypnosis. Their hypnosis on America is now, like somebody did wakey wakey, and maybe Trump did, right? And so the mainstream media's hypnosis and establishment politicians' hypnosis is broken. So now I think it'll happen way more frequently, right?
But not so much because of the candidate, but rather the atmosphere has changed.
The media has changed. I think the media is the key, right? And so those things are intertwined, politics and media. But now you're going to accept the talking points of Fox News or MSNBC, and it's just going to be an assembly line of talking points into your head. That great oppressive system has been broken. It still exists, it still functions, but there are new media swarming all around it. And so that to me is going to create a lot more populists going forward, and not just on the right. My hope is on the left, and we actually deliver, right? So that might be where some of our disagreements are. We still haven't gotten to them, but we will. But I want to stay on that hypnosis point. You said that you studied hypnosis. I'm always curious about that. I don't know what it means to hypnotize someone. Can you get them to do whatever you want? I don't know. You tell me. But what did you mean that Trump was able to hypnotize people? Yeah.
Well, so not in the sense of putting somebody in a trance.
Yeah.
So I use hypnosis more generally for persuasion. But when Trump first called Jeb Bush low energy, I immediately went to social media, or my mother blogged about it, and said that's the end of Jeb Bush. Now, at the time, I don't believe anybody saw that. I think it was just, Trump said a funny thing. It's just one of the things he said. But as soon as I heard the low energy, I realized that he had reframed him. So before that, I thought of Jeb Bush as this calm executive who would be really good under pressure, because he doesn't look like he gets too worked up. He looks like he'd be easy to work with, probably would be good with our allies and negotiating stuff. But the moment that Trump said low energy, that's all I could say. And it compared to Trump's own, glowing orange energy, and you can see the contrast. And one of the things that Trump knows instinctively, which is, I'm going to call this a persuasion and or hypnosis skill, is that people are drawn to energy, and he just had more of it. And when he reframed his main opponent as not having enough, and you could sort of observe it yourself, or it seemed like you could, I thought, nobody can do that. That is, there's only one candidate that I've ever seen who could take somebody out with one sentence, and he did it. And then he did a lot more nicknames after that. So they weren't all as effective as that one, but you could see it was a reproducible skill. He's the brander in chief. So that's what I saw.
Yeah, well, again, this is trippy because you come at it from the right, I come at it from the left, but I saw the same things you saw, and both Anna and I, while we were covering that primary, were like, low energy Jeb nailed it. That's it. He's done. Okay, that's definitely who he is, right? He called him Marco Rubio. He called Little Marco. I used to call him the boy. Same exact thing, right? And so, because that's who he is. He looked like a little child who had just gotten his talking points from his mommy. And he was like, oh yeah, well, this is what I've been told to say by my mom, who's a consultant. And right, so he was done. Unfortunately, Crooked Hillary kind of worked, right? And yeah. And so I get that. What you're saying is he's reframing how people view it, and that's almost a form of hypnosis, right? He's changing the way that you think about something. But tell me, like, and we're gonna have to get to our disagreements quicker because we haven't found one yet, but we are. They definitely exist. But tell me a little bit more about hypnosis. What is hypnosis? When you say that, whether it's on a personal level or on a meta level like this, what do you mean by hypnosis?
Well, what I usually mean when I'm talking about it in the political sense is the reframing and the right choice of words and knowing, for example, that energy is more important than policies, et cetera. But if you're actually being trained to be a hypnotist, you're usually working with one person at a time, and you're doing what's called an induction, which is usually just a long monologue that the hypnotist does that's designed to put somebody into a relaxed state. Now, part of the hypnosis, and maybe I shouldn't tell you this, what makes it work, is when the subject who's being hypnotized expects it to work. So their expectations play into the whole dynamic of it. So it's good if you had an office or you told people you were good at it or they heard you were good at it, then they're more likely to have a good experience. Now, everybody can be hypnotized, but not everybody can have what they call the phenomena. The phenomena would be maybe 20% of the public. You could tell them after you got them in a relaxed state, you could tell them that there's an elephant in the room and they would see an elephant. You could tell them that their arm is cold and they would be freezing. You could tell them that their feet are stuck to the ground and they wouldn't be able to walk. Now, that's only about 20% of the public. But everybody can learn to, let's say, focus on something differently. Maybe if you wanted to work on your fear of flying, you might hypnotize somebody to simply imagine good experiences in an airplane until they sort of got used to it. So it'd be a way to fake experience without the actual experience. So it's not good for quitting smoking or overeating, although people use it for that, but it's no more successful than every other random technique. And the reason is that hypnosis doesn't work if you know it's coming and it's trying to take away something that you like. It won't work for that. You like to eat, you like to smoke, won't work for that. It works about a third of the time, which is what any random technique would have done. So mostly what hypnosis is about is learning that people are irrational creatures. And if you try to treat them as if they're rational, you won't be able to get a good result. But if you treat them as though they're simply emotional creatures who need to be told how to look at stuff, told what to focus on, told what to be afraid of, just told how to rank things. I could go on forever, but the technique is that you simply understand how the brain works. So what the hypnotist learns is how brains work. And then you can take that skill and bring it to any domain, because every domain is people being people. And if you know how they work, you really have an advantage.
So if you suggest something to them that they kind of want to believe and they believe that it might work, they'll go in the direction they kind of emotionally want to go in anyway. And
right.
And part of that the emotion of just wanting to give up control and cede control to someone else because they're tired of of making the decisions in their lives, et cetera? Or am I making that up?
The subject will not have an experience of being controlled. because that's not actually what's happening. There's no point in hypnosis where you couldn't just open your eyes and walk away and say, I don't like this hypnosis. It's more like a coach and a basketball player. The coach says, do this, do that. The basketball player tries it and it works. So they're like, well, that's cool. That worked. So if I had you relaxed and under hypnosis right now, and I told you that your arm was so light that it was starting to float, which is the most common form of induction that I use, you would be interested in that. So if you wanted to prove that I couldn't hypnotize you, your arm wouldn't move and it wouldn't feel any different. But if you were just sort of interested in seeing how this plays out, there's a very strong chance, probably 90% chance, that your arm would feel different. And I would say things like, in a moment, you'll feel your pinky twitch, but it might be one of your other fingers. It might be a big twitch or it could be a small twitch. Now, that's also a technique. You give people a variety of things that you say they might feel, and then they get to pick which of those things they feel, because they're going to feel one of them. Now, if you notice that their pinky twitches, which you can make happen almost every time, then they are convinced, oh, whoa, that pinky did twitch. This is kind of cool. And then they want to go with it. So there's no point in which they think, oh no, I've given up my free will and this evil hypnotist has control of my body. That never happens. They just have an experience that they either like or they don't. And they're either compatible with the process or less compatible. And they can get all kinds of good results if they're compatible with it.
Super interesting. Okay, so let's get to one of our disagreements. So far in our conversation, we've agreed a lot. You seem perfectly reasonable. Then I read a quote like this from you, and I got to go, what in the world? So you said back in the day, I don't want to have anything to do with them, referring to black people, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. And I would say, based on the current way things are going, the best advice I would give to white people is to get the hell away from black people. Just get the F away, because there's no fixing this. Now that sounds terrible. So help me understand, why did you say that? What do you mean by it? Is it accurate, etc.?
Can I ask you a question first about how you received that? What did you think the context was? Because the context always gets removed.
Yeah, no, I don't know the context. That's why I'm asking you. Yeah, I'm not being unfair. That's why I wanted to know what you meant by it.
The reason I got canceled is if you take that out of context, the way you just explained it, it sounds really bad. If you put it in context.
Is there a good context for it? Yeah, help me out here. Go ahead.
Yeah, there actually is. In fact, nobody's disagreed with me yet once they've heard the context. So let me give you some context. It was during the height of the DEI, ESG, CRT, in which people in schools and corporations and in the media were being trained that the problem with the world was people like me, white men, basically, and that we had, in one way or another, our forefathers or us had stolen things from Black Americans in particular, and Black Americans should be trying to get it back. Now, if you find yourself ever in a situation where there's a large population of people who think you're the problem, that's not an ideal situation for you to be around. You're not really going to be able to fix it, because it's not like you can have a personal conversation with every person. So I had kind of been fed up at that point, and I had a lifetime of frustration with this. Just take you back a few decades. My first job was for a bank in the 80s, and I was sort of on the fast track. I was working on my MBA, had a degree in economics. I was a perfect banker. And one day my boss called me into her office and she said, I don't know how to tell you this, but I know you were looking forward to this promotion, but I was told by management I can't give you a promotion now or ever because you're a white man and we don't have enough diversity. And so I said, well, how long is that going to last? And there was no answer. It looked like it could last forever. So I quit, went to the phone company. And I got in the fast track for management at the phone company, local phone company, Pacific Bell. And things were looking great. I was in what they called the binder, which means it was a list of people that they had identified as likely senior management someday. You could make a lot of money as a senior management at a phone company. And so things were looking good. And one day my boss called me in and he said, and I'm not making this up, this really happened. He said, I don't know how to tell you this, but management just sent down the word that you can't be promoted because you're a white male. Now, that's when I started doing Dilbert on the side that eventually allowed me to escape the corporate world and go out on my own. So keep in mind that I had experienced what it's like to be in a situation where you're a white guy and the environment says, you're the problem, white guy. You're the problem. Now, could I stay and fix all of that? If I had stayed at the bank, could I have fixed that? No. If I had stayed at the phone company, could I have fixed that? I mean, just for myself? No. The only thing I could do was leave. And then I was watching it get worse and worse until almost everybody who was a white male was discovering the same problem, and they're more willing to talk about it now. It was super widespread. But in that environment, I would say that you should look to get in an environment that doesn't have you as the target. Something that says, oh, everybody's equal, or that your contribution to the world is what matters. Are you useful? Are you not useful? That's the world I want to live in. Now, the actual words I said were meant to be hyperbole, and they were meant to wake people up. In other words, I wanted people to say, what the hell are you saying? And get into a reasonable debate in which I could say what I just did. And then what I like to do to help people really understand it is to give them this example. Suppose you're a black family and let's say you get a promotion and you're going to move to a new town near work. You've got a choice of two towns. One of the towns is known to have an active Ku Klux Klan membership that's growing. The other one doesn't. Which one is the smart one to move into? Obviously, you would stay away from the town that had the Ku Klux Klan membership, even if it was only 2% of the town. You would be wise to say, well, I can't really fix that. I'm not going to make the Klan go away in this town, but I could go to this other town. So generally speaking, I give the advice that works in a lot of situations. You have to know when to fight and when to remove yourself. Now, in the real world, could you really remove yourself from, Black Americans? No. That's why it was hyperbole. There's no actual way to do that. And even if you could figure one out, it probably wouldn't work for you. But I wanted to make the point that DEI and CRT and ESG and that whole messaging that white men were the problem is unsustainable. Now, of course, I would argue that history has agreed with me, because now that stuff, at least at the federal level, is literally illegal. And it's illegal because it's not useful. It's harmful.
Scott, yet white people have succeeded. It's not like there aren't white men who got the promotions. It's not like, oh, now every CEO since the 1980s, when you started having these issues, is now a black female or or Asian, or et cetera, right? Right. So white men still dominate, and I'm not going in either direction. I'm not saying they shouldn't and they're terrible for being white men, and I'm certainly not saying that they should but they do, right? And so that's why something doesn't match here. I'm not saying that your stories aren't true or right. I get that you had that experience, and some others have had that experience, right?
But millions.
Right, but can you see how from the outside, from our perspective, it seems like, but that obviously isn't the case everywhere, or maybe even in most places, because still most of the CEOs and most of management are white men, right? I'm not saying that like, oh, that's a big problem, but I'm saying it's not like they couldn't make it. So what gives there?
Well, I would put it in this context, and this is advice that I often give. If I were giving advice, as I often do, by the way, to Black Americans, a lot of them come to me for advice. A lot of people do, and some number of them are Black. I always tell them the same thing. If you wanted to guarantee that you had the best shot at success, you want to do well in school. Of course, that's universally true. But then you want to go to a Fortune 500 company that has some kind of ESG or DEI quota, because you'll go right to the top of the list. I would tell a white man, maybe you should learn to be an entrepreneur, or you should work for a small family company that doesn't care about DEI. And I would say that the strategies for success are really, really good in both cases, but you have to take a different strategy. If I'm Black, I'm going Fortune 500. And as long as I don't do something horrible, and just make sure I do my job and do it well, I'm going to do really well. If you're a white guy and you go to IBM or some big company, you are immediately going to be down on the list if there's anybody who is not a white man who is also, somewhat similarly capable. So the strategy should be different. And by the way, let me say it directly, because sometimes these things just have to be said directly. I love Black people. This is not about any Black individual. I've had, lots of great relationships, professional and personal, and it's nothing about any individual. And I'm very much opposed to any form of discrimination against an individual, whether it's employment or, love or friendship or anything else. But when you're looking at a population, just like the fictional Black family I told you about, if they thought there was a population of KKK members in the town, maybe stay away. Even if you do 98% of them disavow the KKK, you don't want to be in that environment. That's an extra risk you don't need.
So Scott, but it sounds like you're comparing Black folks to the KKK there. And so like
Wait.
Because
that's unfair.
No. So help me understand your analogy then. So you're saying if you get to a town with KKK, don't stay there. So who's the KKK in that analogy?
So the trouble with analogies are they're not meant to be precise. So no, there's no intention that Black people are the KKK. What I'm saying is that even if Black people are just minding their own business and living their life, if you walk into the job interview at IBM and the other candidates are equally qualified and they're Black, they're going to have an advantage. So you would be disadvantaged in that environment. So I will.
So the disadvantage of the environment is what you're getting at. Okay, right. But Scott, when you so you had an experience where you felt like you were generalized based on your race and gender, and that understandably, I get it, it pissed you off, right? Now I could make a counter case to that, but I don't want to get deep into a political debate here. I wanted to have a human conversation with you, right? So but I will ask, don't you see how it feels like you're doing a generalization back, especially when you do the over the top comment like white people get the hell away from Black people? Like, of course people are gonna think that's a generalization and a terrible one, right?
So the reason that we're having this conversation is that made your hair stand up and you said you went too far.
Yep.
That's the hypnosis. So that's the Donald Trump part. The part where I know to go too far because I was trying to create a conversation where people would invite me to talk about it. Now, did I go too far? Apparently, yes. but you have to understand that was also the height of the cancellation culture. So people knowing that I was a Trump supporter, it made it easy for the Democrats, and they were all Democrats, who were my publishers and syndication company, et cetera, to say, whoa, it's too much heat. We got to cancel this guy. So a lot of it was political. I think, 0 Republicans canceled me. I don't think there's even one. So at least the Republicans recognized it as political, and they understood that the complaints about DEI, I had taken it to a level that nobody had seen before. I mean, I'd taken it outside of its domain, but I did it intentionally to attract attention because I think that the point was just deeply important. And apparently, a lot of the country believed it too, because DEI is now literally, as I said, illegal at the federal level.
So last thing on that, I think. So yeah, I don't think, look, I understand what you're saying about getting the attention. I don't think that's the right way to do it. I don't know if you regret that or if you think it still was the right way to do it. But I want to just ask you something that I asked people who voted for Trump in 2016 as a general thing, but combined with this topic, which is, like they say at the time when Trump was running, he said we should have a complete ban on Muslims entering the country. Now later, the travel ban turned into something else, et cetera. We don't need to get into that debate. But he said it, he said literally total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the country. So I'm Muslim. Now I'm atheist, but I'm from a Muslim background, so my family's Muslim. So when we're coming in, for example, we would have been banned if that had happened. So I ask people the same thing that I'm asking you here. Like, can you see whether it's me as a Muslim reacting to that or a black person reacting to your quote or your comments that we would think, how can you expect me to support you when you're saying you should stay away from me or you should ban me? It's like, can you see why people would be deeply troubled by that?
Yes, and in my case, I didn't mind if people were deeply troubled as long as they engaged in the topic. So troubling people was not my biggest concern. I was literally trying to make a point that for whatever reason I had never been able to make without drumming up a lot of controversy. Now, the Trump situation is a tough one because one of our most important American values is that we, treat everybody as equals, and we're not going to discriminate based on religion and race and stuff like that. And I'm very much bought into that. So it was. I have to say, it was jarring when Trump said that, because even I was like, that looks like too far. Are you really telling me that there's not some Saudi family that would be perfectly good citizens and they wouldn't be able to come over here? How does that make sense? But then I started to, if you realize that Trump always makes the big first ask, he goes big, gets the attention, sucks all the energy out of the room, and then later, typically, he moderates a little bit, and then something makes a little bit more sense. Now, in this particular case, the Islamic culture seems to me incompatible with a lot of Christian and other American principles. So there's something different about that class of people, which is neither good nor bad, but it is simply incompatible with the existing system. You can't really say, let's do a little bit of Sharia law. It just doesn't overlay with the current system. So I do think that to be a successful immigrant-based country, that you've got to put some attention on how, what is the challenge of assimilation? And when I look at, for example, I'm far more pro immigration from below the border than most people who are pro-Trump, like way more. And that's because my experience is that group of people are amazing. They're family oriented, they're hardworking, they're taking a big risk to make things better for their family. They'll do any job. I mean, it's just a really impressive group of people. But if you were not immersed in that culture, as I am, being in California, you wouldn't know that. And they assimilate really well. I mean, by the second generation, they're just Americans. And I would argue that even in the first generation, you leave them in America for a few years, and they're about as American as you can get. Religion, conservatism. I was probably the least surprised person that Hispanics moved toward Trump in a fairly big way. Because I saw that coming, and I was calling it out years before it showed up in the polls. I said, you don't understand. This is a group of people who really like their God, their family, and obeying the law for the most part. You know, they're going to be very comfortable in a Trump world.
So Scott, you see, like you said the incompatible Sharia law, et cetera, when you were talking about Muslims. Do you get that there's a giant range of Muslims? There's 1.6 to 2 billion Muslims in the world, and that maybe some on the extremes believe in complete Sharia law, and God knows how they interpret that, et cetera. They're fundamentalists, like the fundamentalist Christians who say, you know, Israel has to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque and Jesus is gonna come back and kill everybody. Or the fundamentalist settlers in the West Bank who say, God gave us the land and we're just killing these Palestinians because it's our land. Like, but that you have the whole range of Muslims, like you have the whole range of Christians and Jews and Buddhists, et cetera. And then when people get here, they don't just go, okay, oh, I'm Muslim, I'm gonna make you guys do Sharia law. That they like the Pittsburgh Steelers and Jersey subs like I do. They're like Steve Jobs' Syrian dad, and all of a sudden his son creates Apple, right? Yeah, so when you classify based on religion, it seems like the way you just did, that people are going to go, well, that's just wrong. Am I missing anything, or?
But no, I'm agreeing with you. So my first reaction to that was, well, that's too far. You can't just say there's no such thing as a Muslim who can come to the country. That would seem way too far for me, for exactly the reasons you pointed out. But what Trump was saying was, we're going to put this ban on. I think the language he used was, until we figure out what's going on. Is that close? Something like that.
Yeah,
we figured it out.
Yeah. Well, he should have figured that out while before he ran. Yeah. But okay.
It looked like he was saying, I'm going to put some tourniquet on, but this is not the permanent solution. We're going to have to figure out how to make this work. Now, fairly quickly after that, you can fact check me on this. My memory is not as good, but didn't he fairly quickly have exceptions?
No, when he came into office, he tried it, and then the courts said you can't do that, and then he amended it to include a couple of countries that were not majority Muslim or something along those lines. So now my rough memory of it, but the courts basically made him change it, and he did apply it, I think, to 7 countries instead of all countries in the beginning. So that was already a change. Like, for example, Turkey's a country that's about 99% Muslim, but it's the second largest army in NATO, and it would be absurd to block a NATO ally. So he had to change it to 7, to some number of other countries. Right. But you see, Scott, that the entire conversation is absurd, assuming that Muslims are gonna believe in like fundamentalism, et cetera. What is this? It's like saying, oh, well, we can't let Jews in the country because the Israeli settlers are lunatics. Well, no, they don't represent all Jews, that's crazy.
But would you agree that for every community, there's a rate and number that makes sense? In other words, if you just said everybody of this type can come in with no limit, we would be speaking Chinese pretty soon, or who knows where that would go.
No, I wouldn't do it based on race or religion, though, Scott. I'd do it on rational reasons. Hey, there's 1,000 different metrics we could use, but to leave race and religion out.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that we should be looking at people as individuals, and that if you close yourself off from any race or group or religion, you would be limiting your own options for awesome people who can make a difference. So I'm not in favor of that at all. So don't assume that I agree with Trump's framing or persuasion or policy on that topic. And by the way, if I were you, I would feel exactly the same way you do. Because remember, there's an emotional, personal part to all of this, and then there's sort of the wonky policy part. So I get to talk about the wonky policy part because I have no Muslim background. But when I see you say, do you see why I would be really cautious about this? Totally. Absolutely, I see it. And I don't think we have the exact right solution for this. But if we could get to the point where we could judge anybody by whether they're useful to the country or not, that would take care of everything. There probably is some way to do that.
Okay, it sounds like you were a little uncomfortable with the mass deportation. So I can ask you a million political questions about Trump and has he gone too far? But do you think he's gone too far on mass deportations? And then I'll leave it open-ended, or on anything else.
I will say that it might be that we have only bad choices, because when I watch Tom Homan and he says we're going after the worst first, that's the part where most people agree. All right, get rid of those murderers and rapists. But if they happen to be in a situation where there's a bunch of hardworking, almost Americans who are undocumented, and they just have to take them too because their job requires that, I'm not comfortable with that. But if I look at it as a system instead of at the human level, I say to myself, well, what are you supposed to do? Are we supposed to tell them not to take those people? And how deep does Stephen Miller and Trump want to go? Because when I heard it was the worst first, here's what I thought, and I could be totally wrong about this, that it would take so long to get the worst and you'd sort of never be done with it, that all the other people would by then have found jobs and gotten settled. And then we could have the conversation of, all right, we got rid of all the worst. Crime is down. We're not giving a bunch of freebies to people who weren't born here. The people who are here are doing a great job in general. Can we reconsider how deep we want to go with the deportations? I assume that would be the natural course of things. But am I uncomfortable with just the idea of massively deporting people who are awesome people who are just trying to make a better life and are just working, but they happen to be undocumented? I'm not comfortable with that.
Okay, interesting. Anything else that in this second go around, Epstein files, the bombing of Iran, or anything else that you were uncomfortable with?
Well, the Epstein file, I don't think anybody is comfortable with that. But what I tried to add to the conversation is, if you imagine that the frame you're looking at is the law and order and crime frame, then I would say, yeah, we want to know everything. I want to know the names of the people who were innocent, but they were involved. I want to know the victims. I want to know the perpetrators. I want to know everything. But if Trump is looking at it through a commander-in-chief frame, and I suspect he might be, then the only issue is, would revealing this information be bad for America in some big way? Because it would have to be a big way. Otherwise, I'd say, yeah, you need to fully disclose. You said you would, you promised you would, you ran on it. All your people said they would, and then you didn't. How do you explain that? So the only out I can give him, and this is just speculation because I can't know, is that he saw something that was so bad that it would derail something that was important to the United States. Could be a peace plan, could be almost anything. You could imagine a wide variety of things. But if it turned out, and maybe someday we'll know, that the only reason we're not finding out about it is that there was some billionaire friend of his that he's protecting, well, then I've got a problem with Dan Bongino and Kash Patel and Bondi, because you guys need to resign if that's what's going on. I mean, you need to be patriots and show us that you would not be part of that. But right. They haven't. Now, it could still happen. Bongino is my canary in the coal mine. Like, he's the one I'm watching, because I'm positive that if he thought that the Epstein thing was just protecting some billionaire, I'm positive he would quit. Maybe not on day one, but I think he'd let us know. Yeah. So I don't know.
So look, I want to get to non-politics again one last time. So I don't want to spend too much time on it here, but on this though, the last things I'll say are, look, it could be a billionaire friend, it could be Trump himself, we agree either way, that's terrible, right? If they keep it, under wraps because of that. Or it could be something that damaged America. But if that's the case, Scott, it feels like the only thing that I could think of is either American intelligence agencies or an allies' intelligence agencies did this. But then if you're covering up for that, you're saying, yeah, we let, either American or Israeli or British or whatever intelligence, not only are we covering up the fact that all these child rapes happen, but those agencies set out to rape children in America, to capture, these powerful people, to blackmail them, etc. It feels like we got to know that even more than if Trump or a billionaire is on the list, not less. Yeah. You see what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. So let me agree that the horribleness of the crimes that we assume happened and the ones we know happened, it would be hard to imagine anything that was worse than that. And so you can't say, well, I want to protect the pedos. So nobody's saying that. I'm saying that the only out, and this is just speculation, I'm not even saying that this is the case. The only out I could give Trump is that there's something we don't know about that's bigger than anything is big. Now, I've come to the belief fairly recently that Kennedy was killed by the CIA and that Nixon was probably removed by the CIA and that Ford was probably installed by the CIA. And it could be that we've been a CIA-run nation for many decades. So it could be that Trump just doesn't have the ability to survive, as in not being shot in the head again, if he goes public. And he might have said the only way I can keep the nation whole is to get past the worst bunch of crimes I've ever heard of.
Scott, would you give Biden the same pass?
Yes, because we assume that he knew the same things. And the fact that neither side is outing anybody suggests that it's beyond politics. And it certainly suggests that Trump himself is not involved, because it's hard to imagine that Biden wouldn't have used that tool if it was available to him. Or somebody would.
I don't know if it's beyond politics or it's the core of politics. I mean, special interests by all of our politicians, and they have been for decades. So, that certainly might be it. Okay, so lastly, getting back to non-political stuff. But related. So you had this near-death experience. We hope you're okay now, and you've got the new treatment, it's working better. Did that experience change anything for you politically, philosophically, ideologically, or just how you viewed life?
I think it didn't change too much of my views of the external world. What it did was it ruined my ability to have the normal thoughts that I'm used to, because I'm a 40-year planner. I mean, when I was in high school, I was already planning my entire life. At one point at 6 years old, I thought, I want to be a famous cartoonist. It took me a while to get there, but I plan 10 to 40 years in advance. And then when I thought I had 2 weeks left, nothing looked fun. I would say, hey, I should get a cat. Oh, no, I can't get a cat. It'll be dead in 2 weeks. Hey, I should, so everything I thought about, I couldn't think about in terms of the normal arrow of time. I would just say, oh, well, I guess I can eat dinner. That I think I got time for that. So it really threw me off, because I live in the future, and I didn't have a future to live in. So I became homeless in my own mind.
Wow, what an interesting thing to say. Homeless in your own mind. Yeah, I mean, look, there's a part of that I could relate to, because I plan decades in advance like you do. And so when you realize the impermanence of life, it almost like we were talking about hypnosis, it changes your frame and your perspective on how to think. And so time is running out. And by the way, in your case, because you thought it was literally gonna run out at the end of this month, right? Or last month. But for all of us, time is running out. We're all gonna die. And so I don't know, anything where you then empathize with people more, or it just had a different view of the world, or no, same view of the world, except this one thing of like, I don't know what to do with my head because I normally think of the future and I can't occupy myself with that anymore.
I think it changed some of my priorities and how I deal with some people. And I found that I had an intense need to spend more time with the people I cared about the most. And I was a little bit more brutal about avoiding anything that I didn't want to do in my last month of life. So it changed those things, how I ranked the importance of things. But that was mostly personal. I don't think it changed anything about how I saw the external world. And we didn't talk about the meaning of life, but for me, the meaning of life, the only thing that keeps me satisfied, and has been this way for a long time, is a sense of what I'm doing to be useful to other people. Because I'm really good at taking care of my own needs. I've always been good at that. So the only useful part, the active part that makes me happy, is, did I do something to make somebody else happy? Did I make somebody more comfortable? Did I help them get a better job? And so a lot of my career after the cartooning, at the same time as cartooning, because I'm still doing that. But I wrote books about how to succeed and how to do persuasion and how to reframe things. And when people get back to me and they say, I quit drinking after 40 years after I read your book. I got a promotion because I followed your steps. This is really meaningful. And so as I imagined it was the end of my life, I thought to myself, did I do what I wanted to do? Like, did I accomplish what I would set as my own standard for having I'll call it a good life, meaning that I was useful? And my answer to myself was yes. I'd spend every day, I still work 7 days a week. Obviously, I don't need to. It's because if I don't, I feel like there's somebody underserved. So a lot of my subscribers on the Locals platform, for example, are people who don't have much of a social life. A lot of them are older. And for them, the live streams that I do are their social outlet. And so doing it every day is a big difference, and it makes a big difference in other people's lives. So I'm completely satisfied that I did what I needed to do. And so as I imagined, the end of my life, as I, tried to visualize what it would be like in the final minutes, I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to be okay with this. I feel like I did my job.
Yeah. I ask this of almost everybody that comes on here, has a extended conversation like this, that's been successful. Was there a moment that Dilbert took off where you thought, oh my God, I did it. I can't believe I did it. And how good did that feel?
Well, I like to joke that there are a number of champagne moments, where you're like, wow, this thing just worked out. I'm going to open the champagne. And then before you pull the cork, you realize, oh, there's really a lot more work I have to do to make this work. So for example, when I first got the call from the syndication company that picked up Dilbert the first time in 1989, I celebrated. It's like, whoa, this is the break of a lifetime, because getting a syndication contract is very rare. And it's the most valuable thing that could happen to a cartoonist. So I celebrate, and then they say, all right, but it doesn't guarantee you're going to be in newspapers. It just means we'll work with you to see if you can be in newspapers. And then you work with them for 6 months, and they come back and they say, yup, we're happy working with you. You're going to be in newspapers. And then they try to sell it, and nobody buys it. Or in my case, maybe 24 newspapers bought it, which is not enough to stay in business. And then I go, oh, okay, I got this far, but nobody's really interested. And then I started doing things on the internet, because the internet was new about that time. and found a whole audience for it. And its popularity on the internet allowed us to sell it into newspapers. And then suddenly it was a big deal in newspapers, but not such a big deal. And then the Wall Street Journal one day said, well, we like your comic strip. Could you write a little article for us? And I thought, well, I've never taken a writing class except business writing, which is different. And but I said yes. So I write an article. It does really well in the Wall Street Journal. And then a publisher saw the article and thought, if he could write an article, I wonder if he could write a book. And so they offered me a book deal, one book, and it became a #1 bestseller. It was the Dilbert principle. And then they come back and say, well, if you can write one bestseller, can you write more than one? And we'll give you a multi-book deal. And then they back up the truck and the big checks start coming. But it takes a long time where you've got that champagne and you're like, a lot more work. So
when you finally got to the champagne, were you then satisfied, or did you think, nope, on to the next thing?
Nah. It's just not my personality to say I got there and now I'm done. I only, like I said, I live in the future. So if I could not have parlayed my Dilbert success into another domain, which I would argue I have, my books on how to improve your life are hugely popular. If I hadn't made a dent in the political realm through the podcasting and whatnot, I would have been disappointed. So, in 2018, I got a call to visit Trump in the Oval Office. And it was just to say hi. It was no other reason. He was just sort of working his supporters, making sure that they were on his team and would stay there. But I got all the way to being invited to the Oval Office to talk to the President of the United States. And I thought to myself, all right, okay. It looks like the plan is working.
And you got a little thumbs up there from whichever computer program to tell you that apparently it was working. All right, super last question. If you could give just one piece of advice to people in general, what would it be?
Well, you've heard Elon Musk say this, but I've been saying it for years as well. Be useful. The one thing that will pay off for you and the people around you is if you can find some way to make somebody better off. Now, obviously, you start with yourself and your family and people closest to you. But if you can extend that, so you're doing something useful for the world or your town or your community, that's where all the payoff is. So be useful will guide you all the way to building the set of skills that will make you useful, building the systems you need to, activate those skills. So be useful is the ultimate summary of how to be happy.
All right. Scott Adams, interesting American, creator of Dilbert, does Real Coffee with Scott Adams. And, look, we had a conversation here where we had plenty of disagreements, but if we wanted to focus on the disagreements, we'd have a lot more. But we had a human conversation instead. And I hope that some people took something away from it that was positive. But we'll, I guess, let history and the audience judge that. Scott, for your willingness to do it, to have a conversation with someone that doesn't always agree, I appreciate that. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I very much appreciate your openness to both sides, and it's rare. So I talk you up quite a bit when you don't know about it. So I say good things about you behind your back. Thank you.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you for doing that. And now that will also be used against me.
Lovely.
Okay, Scott Adams, thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching the Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.